So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our September meeting for Data in the Greater Good. I'm Elaine Gamble, Community Leader of Data in the Greater Good, where our focus is the use of data, digital transformation, data and analytics, and areas related to the use of data in mission-driven areas. We're honored to have with us tonight Carolyn Royston, Chief Experience Officer at the Smithsonian Design Museum in New York City. Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum is the only museum in the United States devoted exclusively to historical and contemporary design, and is the steward of one of the most diverse and comprehensive design collections in existence. More than 210,000 design objects spanning 30 centuries. From ancient textiles and works on paper to icons of modern design and cutting-edge technology, Cooper Hewitt's collection serves as an inspiration for creative work of all kinds and tells the story of design's paramount importance in improving our world. Almost overnight, the museum sector had to confront a triple crisis of a global pandemic, economic turmoil, social injustice. Our museums immediately closed their doors. Staff moved to working remotely. Wide-scale job losses. The triple crisis created an urgent need for museums to re-examine their roles as trusted institutions with very well-entrenched systemic structures and practices that had driven the way they collect, present, and fund their organizations. They had to reimagine that. Suddenly, becoming a virtual museum was not only a priority, but an absolute necessity. With physical spaces closed for a year, it was the only way to bring our collections and programs to those museums served, such as Cooper Hewitt. During this period, Cooper Hewitt gained new national and international audiences through increased digital engagement, and their teams quickly adjusted to new ways of working with wide-scale adoption of a range of collaborative online tools. At the same time, this pivot to digital exposed longstanding issues related to digital engagement in the sector, skill gaps for the staff, lack of ongoing investment in digital infrastructure, among other areas. Carolyn Royston, Chief Experience Officer, will talk to us tonight about some key questions. How can data help us better understand how these changes have impacted Cooper Hewitt and museums in general? Are these changes temporary, or has there been a permanent change in visitor preferences? Based on what we've seen in the data, which changes have had a positive impact on museum engagement? Which changes have been more challenging to navigate? What does this mean for the future at Cooper Hewitt and museums in general? Carolyn Royston, Chief Experience Officer, will talk to us about these questions. She has had a distinguished career of over 25 years in museums. She joined Cooper Hewitt in 2018 as its Chief Experience Officer, which was a new role that aims to seamlessly weave the digital and physical experience together to create an integrated visitor experience. Prior to Cooper Hewitt, she served as inaugural Director of Digital and Information Services at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. She's also been Head of Digital at Imperial War Museums in the UK. She has been an Oxford Cultural Leadership alum and also leads a volunteer board of senior level museum technologists and small executive team representing informational professionals from the cultural sector institutions around the world. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn. Carolyn, it's an honor to have you with us tonight. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Elaine, and what a wonderful introduction. I think you've almost done my entire talk. So thank you, and thank you to everybody that has joined this evening, and for those people who are going to be listening to this afterwards on a recording, thank you very much for that as well. The story of data at Cooper Hewitt and really the impact of the pandemic and and beyond. And you know, I still consider us in the pandemic. We're in a different phase, but we are still negotiating it, and it is still a rapidly changing landscape for us. So let me just start off by telling you a little bit about me. I mean, Elaine covered it very, very nicely in the intro, but as she said, I've worked in museums now at a senior level for the last 25 years. And across that time, I started out in digital learning. I was actually a teacher before I got into technology and into museums, digital engagement, and most recently museum experience. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. I've also been very, very fortunate in my career to have worked with in a range of different museums with diverse collections. So historical and contemporary art, a history museum at the Imperial War Museum, decorative arts and design. So I worked both at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London and now at Cooper Hewitt, and also performing arts and gardens. So I've really covered the whole sort of gamut of cultural organizations. And it's surprising, I think, to know that they are quite different depending on their collections, very different audience profiles, very different types of media that you find in collections. But at the heart, there's always been, for me, both a learning and education element, but also a very strong storytelling element. So my role now is Chief Experience Officer. And again, as Elaine said, it's a new role, not just for Cooper Hewitt, but for the sector in general. And really, it is about bringing together the physical, human, and digital elements of a museum experience across every touch point. And as a consequence, I manage a portfolio of departments that are really public facing and have a public engagement element. So on both digital and IT, I also manage the CRM, the customer relationship management system, AV in the galleries, accessibility and inclusion for the museum, the visitor services team, so the team that are responsible for admissions and responsible for onboarding visitors when they first come into the museum, and operations and facilities, so the building itself. So when there's a leak, that's also my responsibility. But that also includes things like wayfinding around the museum and thinking about increasing access. Cooper Hewitt, as you can tell from Bill's background, is a mansion and was Andrew Carnegie's home originally. It was not designed to be a museum. And so it presents all sorts of issues for increasing public access and making sure that it really is accessible to as many people as possible. And as I said, this is an unusual role in museums, not so unusual in other sectors, but it's a new role. There are probably 2 other people in the US that have that role currently. And what's interesting, I think, about the role as well is that it can be made up of lots of different kinds of departments. It just so happens that this is the way that I have formulated it at Cooper Hewitt. So when I talk about visitor experience in museums, I'm really talking about the end-to-end experience. And by that, I mean the pre-visit, so the people who are thinking about coming to the museum and planning a visit, to the visit itself, so actually walking through the doors and walking around the galleries, and then the post-visit, so what happens after they leave and the relationship that we have with the visitors when they've departed. And then this new category of audience, which I'm going to talk more about later, which is remote audience. And this is really a direct consequence of the pandemic. And this is really about those audiences that will never visit Cooper Hewitt, but are interested in engaging with us in some way and thinking about what kinds of experience, what visitor experience they are going to have that's equitable with a post-visit, with a physical visit. So a new and interesting challenge for museums. And the real question, I think, for the role and thinking about this end-to-end experience is, how do we provide the visitor with the right services and information at the right time and in the right form? And if we go back to this idea of the human, the physical, and the digital making up this a museum experience, then it really is about thinking about, well, when someone is thinking about a pre-visit, what information do they need on their website? When someone is in the museum, is it a friendly face that greets them at the door and provides a welcoming and an inclusive experience? Is it wayfinding and better signage around the museum so it's easy for people to find the restrooms and the cloakroom? Is it a survey at the end of the visit to find out how people have enjoyed their visit and how we continue to engage with them? So there's lots and lots of different ways and lots of touch points, and we have to think about what's the right one at the right time. Just to show you, for those of you that don't know, this is Cooper Hewitt, and as I said, it was Andrew Carnegie's home originally. It is on Fifth Avenue in Museum Mile. It is on 5th and 90th and 91st. And we're about 2 blocks away from the Guggenheim, a block away from the Jewish Museum, 5 blocks away from the Met, and several other galleries. So we are right in the heart of New York's museum land. This is the entrance when you come into the museum. As you can see, it's quite beautiful and quite imposing as a space. And we call the space the Great Hall. This is an example of one of the galleries. This I think was a bedroom originally in the building. We call it the teak room for obvious reasons, but again, a very beautiful room with quite extraordinary architecture and design. And then you've got these the hallways on the 2nd floor with more traditional museum cases and more of an open space. So you have these small rooms, these more open spaces. And it does make it quite challenging as a museum to work with the design and to think about how to best utilize the spaces for the exhibitions that we're showing. Much easier when you have a white box space, a more traditional museum space. The museum also has a lot of technology in it. This is an example of digital tables. These are located throughout the museum, and they provide an opportunity for visitors to explore the collections, to do some of their own design and drawing on the tables. As I said, they are located throughout the museum. They're also quite social. Obviously, you can see here multi-users. We also have something called the immersion room, or sometimes known as the wallpaper room. And again, this is a space where visitors can design their own wallpaper, inspired by the incredible wallpaper collection that Cooper Hewitt holds. It's also become a space for people to take selfies, and is a popular Instagram account for us in the museum. So that was just to give you a flavor of Cooper Hewitt. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about data and our approach to data. So really, digital activity in a museum encompasses many data points, opportunities for us to collect data and to use data to help us to improve the visitor experience. And these touch points are both located at the front, but also for back of house. And we need skills, and we need technology, and we need systems, and we need the understanding of visitor experience to really take advantage of these multiple touch points. And as part of our data strategy, our overall digital strategy really looks at how we can evolve our digital infrastructure so that we have a more linked and connected ecosystem. We want to really embed storytelling across all of our experiences. We really want to focus on user-centered design with our digital audiences. and we want to become more data driven as an organization. And this is really, these 4 points are really underpinning our digital strategy and transformation currently. And this predates the pandemic, was accelerated during the pandemic when we were closed, and now we are picking this up again and continuing post, well, in whatever phase of the pandemic we're in now. And just to understand our technology stack, that we have a database and systems. This is highly simplified, but the database and systems architecture and infrastructure sitting there at the foundation. At the top, we have interfaces for our web and gallery experiences. And those are really about, multiple different kinds of visitor-facing experiences that we might create on the back of this more robust and open infrastructure that we're developing, foundational structure, and then that middle layer of visitor data. So, and how all those things talk to each other and interact with each other. And that is a critical part of our technology strategy going forward. So thinking about the visitor experience, we sort of think about what that journey looks like from the moment that someone thinks about coming to the museum to what happens across some of these touch points when they are planning a visit, when they come to visit, and what happens after they visit. And there are 2 pathways that people can take. They have an experience at the museum and then they want to continue the engagement, or we want to continue to engage them with the museum, or they come and they forget about the museum and they don't visit again and don't recommend it to others and don't want to engage with us. And I think what's interesting is that at every single one of these junctures, there are opportunities for us. We see them as opportunities, every single one of them. Opportunities for us to connect with the visitor, opportunities for us to ask them questions, to provide some kind of intervention, to get some kind of feedback, give them information, whatever it might be, with the aim that they are ultimately, we want them to continue their engagement with us and follow that route. So one of our really important data strategies is how do we maximize these opportunities at these various data points. And I won't go through all of this, and it's hugely, it's a lot of stuff on the screen, but I kind of threw it all there because basically that is built out from that previous screen. So if you think about, all of those data points and those opportunities, if you break them down into their various constituents, these are all the various opportunities that we have to interact with our visitors and connect with our visitors. And so it really is a very holistic approach to thinking about visitor experience, because different areas of the museum manage these different areas of activity. And so we need to make sure that when we have a data strategy that's really underpinning, and maximizing these opportunities, that we are engaging with the whole audience, that this is the whole museum, that this is a holistic and integrated approach to be thinking about, who in the museum needs to be responsible for these various data points. And then how do we collect that data? How do we then think about that data? How do we use that data and the insights from that data to help us to inform and improve our services and our practice with our visitors? So we have a CRM, an enterprise-wide CRM. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a drink. So we have an enterprise-wide CRM, and for a museum, it looks like this. We have a database, we have a ticketing system, we have a system for advancement and development, we have a system for marketing, platform for marketing, we have a platform for education so that they can capture public program events and who's in participating, school events, anything like that. We have our shop with marketing. Sorry, I can't see what the I'm I'm being blocked from my screen, so I don't know what that previous, I can't see what that previous M was. But anyway, all of these things are, and we have finance. So all of these things make up our enterprise-wide system. And as I said, the challenge is ensuring that all of these different components, all of these different constituent parts are working together in a holistic way. Because ultimately what we're really trying to do is create these a progressive engagement roadmap for our audiences, so that, you know, at whatever point they come into the museum, whether it's via our website, whether it's via social, whether it's through a school group, whether it's through an exhibition, coming to an exhibition, whether it's through a public program, whether it's through using our library, that we have routes for them to progress and to be thinking about how can we continue to engage them? How can we continue to build their trust in us as a brand, their loyalty in us as a brand? How can we encourage them to want to move from being just a visitor or an occasional user of our services into a person who might want to become a member, or might want to become a donor, or a patron in some way. And so, as you can see, again, just going back to this idea of a holistic experience, having the different areas of the museum really connected into this progressive engagement roadmap is critical. And for us to be understanding where people are on this roadmap, how can we monitor and manage the visitors, so that we are making sure that when Mrs. Smith comes for the 6th time in 6 months, that we're not just selling her a ticket, we're actually saying, Mrs. Smith, this is the 6th time you visited the museum. It really is worth your while to become a member. Or we noticed, Mrs. Smith, that you visited this exhibition on chairs. Did you know that we have this incredible publication in our shop? Or we've got 2 public programs coming up on your favorite designers, and we'd really like to draw your attention to that. So being able to develop not only progressive engagement, but also more personalization as people become more engaged with us. And what's interesting is it's a challenge for museums. If you're a performing arts organization, you have a lot more information about your visitors or your customers, in the sense that, you know, when a customer buys a ticket for a performance, you know that they're sitting in row J, seat 16, and you can start to attribute all sorts of things to that person. You can see how often they've bought a ticket, whether they bought a series, you know, whether they need a parking, they need a reduction for parking, all sorts of things. It's a lot harder for a museum to really understand who's coming through the door and how they are interacting with us. However, this has got a whole lot better since COVID, because now we have mandatory pre-visit ticketing and contactless ticketing. So we are now able to capture a lot more useful information about our visitors as they are interacting with us. Whoops. So I just wanted to touch on this idea of data governance, because again, this is a very, very important part. We're a public body, we are publicly funded. We have very, very strict compliance around capturing public data, people's privacy data, around PCI, financial transaction data, and we can be heavily, heavily fined if we are not compliant. So data governance and understanding about that is really a critical element of what we do. So we have to manage our data very carefully across the organization. We have to have a standardized approach to collecting and organizing accurate data. Not only does this make our data better and make sure that we have good data as opposed to bad data, that we have data that we can trust rather than data that we have to question, but importantly also it means that we're all collecting data and managing data and storing data in the same way, and that it is done under really strict compliance standards. And as I said, the reliable data also enables us to make informed in business decisions. So this is really moving us away from what I call anecdata, which is, you know, oh, we think people really enjoyed this exhibition, so we're going to do more of that. Or, you know, oh, yeah, of course, people had a great time, without actually being able to back it up with real data. So those days now for us are over, and really we are now, you know, part of being data driven means that we will be using the data and being more data literate as an organization, and that this is very, very important to us. So, as I said, this is important because of privacy, it's important because of PCI compliance, and it reduces risk for us by managing our data in the right ways. It means that we have good data health, and it means that we can start to develop a holistic strategy around customer data. So moving away from this idea of marketing saying, well, these are our lists and this is our data, and advancement saying, well, this is our list and this is our data, and the two will never meet and the two will never talk to each other, and we'll just do our own things. Those days, again, are over now. We have a central CRM system, and that system means that the data now is Cooper Hewitt data and belongs to the whole organization. But it's a culture shift. And now we can also start to think about how we use that data in more strategic marketing ways, that we're able to make better, more targeted marketing lists, have a better idea of who our audiences are. And this leads to more revenue generating opportunities. So again, if you know Mrs. Smith has visited 6 times, let's sell her a membership. And let's just think about where are the revenue, how can we upsell, how can we cross-sell? And this is very critical. And this is, again, that shift away from, you know, my data, my department's data, to our data, and understanding that every single person in the organization, data is everyone's responsibility. So it cannot be one person who is responsible only for PCI compliance, one person who is responsible for privacy compliance. We're all dealing with data every day. We all have to understand what the requirements are, what the regulations are. It's our responsibility as a museum to ensure that the staff are data literate, that they're trained, that they understand about data governance. So in terms of managing our data governance, we have a steering group, and that steering group is responsible for setting that vision for the way we manage data in the organization. We've created a data governance charter, which is a kind of living document about the ways that we are using data, and about you know, all of the compliance issues. And if anything changes or if new regulations come up, that all gets reflected in that charter. And we set the KPIs for the museum as well. So this steering group is responsible for working with departments in agreement with the director, in agreement with the management team, to help set the KPIs, which help us, the key performance indicators, which help us to measure how successful we're being. So again, using the data, being data-driven, and actually having measurable success criteria that enables us, again, to move away from the anecdotal and move into making more informed business decisions. And we have working group and power users. So the power users are the people that really have the CRM on their dashboard, as a dashboard on their desktop. They're working in the CRM almost all the time. They're looking at real-time data, real-time information. They are the ones that are really operating these data standards and these business practices and the day-to-day operations. The working group of the people who are thinking about the business systems, thinking about the business practices to help the business, to help the power users, and then all that gets sent up to the steering group to monitor and manage. So I know it sounds a little bit complicated, but it's such an important area for us. And, you know, as I said, this is new really for us as a museum to be thinking in this way. And so making it highly structured, making sure that we have lots of ways to mitigate risk, lots of ways to sort of share the risk, share the burden, share the knowledge, means that it becomes more socialized as a practice in the organization. And this is really, really important. I'm just hoping that this moves on. Not sure what's happened here. Ah, there we go. So just in terms of setting the KPIs and understanding a bit what a museum KPI might be, it's really ensuring that they align with the wider strategic goals and priorities of the museum. At a department level, there are individual goals, individual department goals. And also we need to agree the measures of success across these KPIs to monitor if we are actually achieving them, and enabling us also to course correct if we're not, and to really understand why we're not achieving those goals, and what are the things that we might want to do differently or might need to do differently in order to achieve them. So examples of KPIs are, in our learning and outreach with our education team, it's participation in educational programs, it's number of volunteers, it's the reach that we have in terms of the people participating, and it's also range of programs. So these are just examples to give you a sense. For public engagement, it's looking at audience profile and reach. So who is engaging with us? It's numbers of visitors, so it's also quantitative. It's also, numbers of people that visit the exhibitions, programs, membership, etc. And for finance and governance, it's about, are we seeing a growth in revenue in areas like admissions, like the cafe, like membership, like through donors. So all of that information is stored in our CRM. All of that information is accessible. And those are the ways that we are setting the KPIs and monitoring our success. So the impact of the pandemic on all of this. So this was all work that I've shown you. This is all work that really began about 2.5 years ago, where we started to put these things in place, where we started to implement, roll out the CRM so that it was not just an admissions platform, but also was incorporating these other departments. And as Elaine alluded to at the beginning, the impact of the pandemic was extreme for us, as it was for many, many other sectors. But essentially, the world for us changed overnight. We closed our doors on March 13th, 2020, and we didn't actually open again until June 2021. Other New York museums opened in late summer and the fall, but because we're a federal entity, we did not open. And in fact, we are still mainly working remotely in enhanced teleworking mode. I'm still working from home. And we really only have essential staff on site who are basically there to keep the museum open during opening hours. We have to become a museum without walls. Digital was the only way for us to deliver our programs and to deliver on our mission. We tend to have, when we were pre-pandemic, a very large local audience. This very rapidly moved to a national and international remote audiences. So quite a different audience profile very quickly. We saw different audience behaviors, things that people were interested in, length of time on our site, length of time engaging with us, and really embracing creative, looking for creative outputs, looking for ways to also educate. Obviously, a lot of homeschooling going on, so looking for museum resources, but also for creative activities and endeavors. It was tough. I'm not going to lie. It was really, really tough to shift to this really, as I said, overnight mode of working for a industry that is, heavily reliant on bricks and mortar, and people coming through the door and people seeing the collections and the exhibitions, to suddenly be museums without walls and having to work in remote ways, again, people not being very experienced in working with collaborative and remote tools and digital tools, it was challenging. However, out of a crisis comes opportunity. And so what we've seen is that we use that time to look at everything that we do. And you know, with the pandemic, with the social injustice issues, with the financial challenges, it really was an opportunity to look at every single thing that we did. Is it still relevant? Is it still resonant? Is it what people need now in this time of, you know, in this terrible time, and now in this time as we emerge out of the pandemic and look at recovery and renewal? Is Cooper Hewitt, America's Design Museum, providing the things that that people need? It enabled us to really experiment with new ways of working. I mentioned, you know, we use Miro. Now that's become a core tool for us. We are in Teams, and we work, you know, we basically moved to that almost instantaneously. And we've broken down barriers between departments because it really doesn't make any sense not to work in that way anymore. We've developed new staff skills as we've brought these new tools on, as we've brought these new ways of working. We've also asked staff to expand their digital competency, their digital literacy, and to feel more comfortable in the digital realm. We've had to think about new ways for the museum to be relevant. We can't rely on people coming through the door anymore. So how do we make our program more relevant, our programs and services more relevant? How do we really think about how we want to present ourselves so that people, there is a reason for people to engage with us and continue to engage with us? And how do we become more data driven? So suddenly, as a result of you know, becoming remote overnight, becoming virtual overnight, it's given us new opportunities to think about how we want to use data and to collect data. And as I said, one example is, you know, through this new time ticketing and contactless ticketing, and the opportunity to collect, you know, different kinds of data about our visitors, which is a lot easier to do than when they're just walking up to the admission desk and buying a ticket on the spot. It's a lot harder. We try to ask for an email, for a zip code, but obviously with time ticketing, we can ask for a lot more information, which is very useful. And it's giving us an opportunity to really examine how we serve remote audiences, both over the time that we've been in the pandemic, but also going forward, and how we continue to engage those people that will continue to be remote, even though our doors are open. And this really big existential question of, you know, what do we want to take forward out of all of this, out of the, you know, tough stuff, but also the good stuff? What do we want to take forward in a post-COVID world? And what opportunities now through this do we have to leave behind? The things that weren't working well, the old practices, the inefficiencies, you know, the old ways of working. What do we want to leave behind? And those are questions which I think, you know, most organizations are having in some form or another. And if they're not, then I think that's quite worrying. But in thinking about that, you know, and there are no answers right now, and I think we're figuring it out. But the important thing is to make space for those conversations. You know, some people will not go back to the museum full time ever again. Some of us will be hybrid workers. Some people will continue to be on site, and that will be their primary mode. So, you know, very, very different kinds of questions and different opportunities. And if we do suddenly have these hybrid states of working, you know, what does that mean as well? How do we continue to create a museum culture for those people that are on site and seeing each other every day, to those people that are now remote and not working? And again, these are not museum specific questions, except that we are a very building centric industry, and so it does create, you know, definitely some very challenging questions for us to think about moving forward. And I just wanted to put up some slides. I won't go into them in detail. These were there was a study done by a company called LaPlaca Cohen, who are a big marketing and strategy agency in the museum sector, the cultural sector, and they did some very wide scale surveys over last summer to try to understand the impact of the pandemic for our sector, and came back to us with some really interesting data. 81% reported doing something creative during the pandemic, and then they highlighted the kinds of activities that people were doing. We are seeing digital trends where people were wanting to engage with online cultural offerings. From pre-COVID recorded performances to live stream performances for activities for kids, online classes and workshops, podcasts, and really finding the value in that and looking to us as trusted institutions to be able to provide that kind of engagement for people during this terrible period. And then I think this is kind of interesting as well. They looked across many different types of attractions, cultural attractions, and really found that there was a very high percentage of people who were visiting us online, engaging with our services and offerings online, but had never visited the institution before. So they were not loyal people to Cooper Hewitt. They were people who were looking for things on design or looking for creative activities, or people who were looking for things around about art, but weren't necessarily people that were visitors. And I think this is really interesting to us, because just going back to this point around remote audiences and beginning to, cultivate and develop that as a new audience segment in a real way, and thinking about them in an equitable way to the people that are actually visiting and coming through our doors. What do we need to do to service now these two very distinct kind of audience groups of people who are going to visit and be on site, and there's people who are not going to visit but still want to engage with us? What does that look like in terms of programming, in terms of services? And again, those are interesting questions which we're trying to figure out at the moment. So this is interesting information for us, and the sort of data that we've been collecting, during closure, the things that we were seeing: a huge increase in our website stats, obviously a massive decrease in our visit pages, which when we are open are our most popular pages on our website. When we're closed, no one needs to visit those pages. So people were really looking and exploring other parts of our website, which was also interesting to us. We saw 1,000% increase in our collection site. People who were, again, looking for information, looking for beautiful things to look at, and wanting to engage with us. And again, that was interesting. And we did a revamp of our homepage of our collection site quite early on last summer. And that really helped, based on the data that we were seeing, really helped in terms of improving user experience and being able to better direct people to the information that they were looking for and wanted. We saw a huge increase in social media, and we saw bigger audiences than we can manage on site. We only have the capacity to manage 100 people in our lecture room when we have a physical event, and suddenly we were seeing hundreds of people coming to our public programs, and also from many countries. I did one event, we had people from 25 different countries. So, we could never have that if we were just doing that event in a physical space. So again, really interesting information for us, and interesting to think about, what is an equitable program in a physical versus remote, and what might be the revenue generating opportunities as we think about virtual programming going forward. Since reopening our doors at the end of June, as I said, we now require people to buy tickets online. It's mandatory. So we're able to gather much more robust data about those people. We are also able to go back to them because we have all their information, to ask them after a visit, did they enjoy the visit? What did they enjoy? You know, do they have suggestions for or future ideas for future activities? And we are continuing in an ongoing way to measure our virtual engagement. So we're continuing. We do not currently, we're not allowed to have public programs on site yet. So virtual programming is still our main means of running our programs. So we're continuing to measure those. So really interesting, you know, what we're seeing. And again, I won't go into this in detail, but this is a comparison from the last couple of years with data from now. And we obviously have not got to the end of this fiscal year. So it looks like we will surpass even what we did last year with us being closed. So as you can see, just lots more engagement across all of these digital realms. We're seeing interesting factors in terms of visitation. You know, we're not open. We're only open 5 days a week as opposed to 7, which we were pre-pandemic. So we have fewer operating hours. We're also only open for a shorter amount of time in the day. And we also have a cap on capacity. So we are only really still at about 50% of our capacity. That's a Smithsonian requirement right now. They're really, up until very recently, and I mean really still, there's been a lack of tourism. So we've been relying very heavily on New York audiences and some national visitors. But really, New York, you know, obviously is a tourism hub. We're a Museum Mile. That was a huge percentage of our audience pre-pandemic. So this is a significant decrease for us. There's also a high attrition rate when people book online. We're free at the moment. We're going to be, normally we used to charge pre-pandemic. We're free through the end of November, thanks to gifts from our trustees. And what we find is when we're free, people book with good intentions and then don't necessarily show up because they, for whatever reason, and there's no penalty, they haven't paid any money. So we're seeing quite a high attrition rate in terms of people who are not attending, even though they bought a ticket. We keep our eye on COVID and the case numbers. Obviously, the Delta variants had an impact. We're now doing the mandatory New York City checks. And, you know, that has some impact as well in terms of some people not wanting to visit either because they haven't been vaccinated or they don't want to go through the checks, and other things as well, just in terms of what we have on offer. So there's a number of factors, but we are seeing a downward trend for our visitation, which is something that we hope to address, you know, again, as we're coming out of COVID and tourists start to return to New York.
Carolyn, we can wrap up soon.
Yep, I'm literally at the end. And the last point here really is just to show that we have, you know, really hyper-local audiences, but also now this very big national reach that perhaps we didn't have prior to COVID. Going forward, the landscape's still changing. It's still unpredictable. We'll continue to collect data across these data points. We continue to compare our visitation with peer organizations to see if there are any trends that we're sharing across the sector. We're continuing to refine our post-visit surveys, better understand what visitors need, and this new sort of planning now for hybrid audiences and growing remote audiences. And that's it. So thank you very much for listening. I'll come out.
Carolyn, thank you so much. Just very, very comprehensive, excellent talk, fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
So really appreciate your inspiring us with the wealth of insights in your presentation. I'm now going to begin our Q&A, and we have a few questions in the chat. First, M. Dabine, do you want to share your question, or would you like me to share it? Or I can share it. Have you heard of any museums using Wi-Fi sniffing and related data privacy issues?
No, I have not. I don't know about that, but I would imagine that it is something that the Smithsonian would not be very comfortable with.
Yes, absolutely. Larry Leibovich, do you want to share your question?
I don't think he's here anymore.
Okay. So how does the number of online visits per day during the pandemic compare to the number of in-person visits per day before the pandemic? I believe you addressed that to some degree. Did you want to provide that again?
I mean, we have many more people, visitors online than come through our doors. And I mean, this is very common. And I think this is really an indication of how museums need to continue to invest in digital, need to invest in thinking about remote audiences, because you know, they are that you know, I don't know what the ratio is, but you know, we're talking many hundreds of thousands of people over the year that will visit us online, you know, compared to the people, I mean, millions actually, compared to the people that come through our door.
Right. How did you navigate evolving your staff skills, many of whom may not have been using a lot of digital tools and have extensive knowledge in that area, mainly because of the sector you're in, and suddenly having to become digital experts and having fluency in that area? What was that evolution like for you? How do you feel about the level of success that you had?
It's, I think has been surprisingly good in the sense that people haven't really had a choice. They've had to engage with it. And we have, my IT guys have provided an enormous amount of support for people, teaching them, onboarding them with Teams, onboarding them with remote accessing into their computers. My digital team have done a lot of work with the staff around using collaborative tools like Miro, and seeing the benefits of that. And I think that increasingly people have become more comfortable. And I mean, I think as a sector, we were already engaging with this, you know, because the world is getting more digital. But the pandemic has totally accelerated that. And I think that what's interesting is not just the tools, but also thinking about what does engagement look like in an online environment. So if you think about exhibitions, for example, and what we saw was a proliferation of virtual tours and virtual exhibitions. And the difference between ones which were merely like walkthroughs of a physical exhibition and really weren't very engaging, because those exhibitions were not designed for sitting at home. They were designed to being in person and walking through, versus actually designing for the online space and thinking about how to maximize the digital space to create very compelling experiences. And so those museums, helping curators particularly to think about what does that look like. And so they might not necessarily need to be able to do the coding and the programming, but understanding more about the engagement side of it. What does the user, what does the visitor experience? You know, sitting at home on your sofa, interacting with the museum and going to an exhibition is very different than walking through a museum.
Mm-hmm. And our last question from L. Christman. Did you want to share your question? Or I will share it. What kind of online activities do visitors engage in? Do you offer activities in addition to looking at the collection? Are images downloadable for art projects, etc.?
Yeah, all our collection is open access. So it's available for download, for use for educational and non-commercial purposes. And we have about 215,000 objects available on our website. The Smithsonian has 2 to 3 million 2D and 3D objects that are open access and also available to download and free to use. It's an incredible resource. And online activities range from design activities, making things at home, to, as I said, kind of experiencing an exhibition, to I'm trying to think of other things. You put me on the spot. Trying to think of other things that we did. A whole host of, a lot of public programs, a lot of talks, lots of kind of hands-on. So things that you can do in your home, with the things around you, and thinking about those. Lots of educational activities for schools, for school use and for kids. So many, many, many things. All museums pivoted to that, and everything was free to use.
Excellent. Okay, well, on that note, again, Carolyn, thank you so much for inspiring us this evening with an excellent talk. And if you have not been to Cooper Hewitt, I hope that you will visit. Also, our next meeting in October at this time, our plans are to have the American Red Cross with DataKind and how they have worked on projects and data around preventing home fires and getting more smoke alarms into families' homes. Should be very interesting talk. We hope you will join us next month as well. Thank you all for this evening, and thank you, Carolyn, again.
Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good night.